If you wouldn't mind, we'd appreciate you putting your full name and organization in the chat. Please, if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to enter those into the chat. Phil's going to be monitoring those for us. And just a brief reminder that NSGIC 3DHP for the nation is a cooperative agreement between NSGIC and USGS, and the intent is to engage state and local governments and their private sector partners in the derivation of hydrographic data from LiDAR and other 3D data sources. Just a little reminder, we are in project year 2, correct, right now. We have extended the forum to an hour and a half. We're going to try and keep the core content to an hour with the option to let discussion spill over into the last half hour. We are also, and I know this is a little confusing, we are incorporating 3DHP interest group meetings, and we're just going to go ahead and use those placeholders we have for the forum. So the forum will be replaced March, June, September, and December with our quarterly 3DHP interest group meetings. And as always, if you're interested in presenting your work, please give me a call or email, and we'd love to have you join us. Just a little bit of update here. You know, our activities are there on the right. The dark blue is our monthly forum. We have this, and we record the presentation. We develop a Q&A doc, and all of this is published at the NSGIC Learning link. Make sure you get the earlier ones, I suggest when you go in, you search on both 3DHP and our former designation as elevation-derived hydrography, or EDH. Our next task is to establish communities at mynsgic.org, and most of you are on the 3DHP for the Nation interest group. That's General Information Project Updates. And as I said, our next meeting will be June 15th. I did want to give you a heads up. We are going to disband the 3DHP FTN working group. We've really used the interest group. There's an edit. We've really used the interest group as our working group, so it felt kind of pointless to have 2 different groups going on right now. A little confusing, a little bit more overhead on project management than we expected. So I will ask you, and I'll run a check too, but if you are a member of the working group but not a member of the interest group, please go into the NSGIC communities and make sure you sign up for the interest group. We're just going to kind of archive the working group for now. We may develop a state team at a later time. Those of you that are involved with the 3D for the Nation project know that we have a state team as well as our interest group, and we may emulate that if a need arises. So just a heads up, we're going to sort of consolidate here on the interest group. And if you have any questions, just let us, if that's confusing or you want more information, I'm happy to talk to you about that. Going down through our activities, the inventory, the state and regional 3DHP experiences, we are still collecting the experience inventory notes. Your experiences with the 3D hydrography, Phil has created both a short and a long form. And I am going to paste that into the chat with some spell checking. Okay. So if you have activities, please visit this site. Actually, I'm going to also bring you up to date on the info hub, and I think that would be a way that you can access the short form. I'll let Phil explain that. The critical factors, we've had good work on the critical factors this year. USGS is doing some final edits to sort of identify things that we may not be, that may be covered by the spec or otherwise are not particularly relevant to the project. Excuse me for just a second. Our next step are to prioritize those factors. What are the key issues we need to address as we and USGS move forward with 3D hydrography? Once we identify those factors, we're going to figure out the actions and then the best organization to undertake those actions. So that's our next steps with the critical factors. As I said, we have the activity to, excuse me just a second. Alexa keeps wanting to interfere with what's going on. And I wanted to put a link to the hub in here. Please check it out. Phil's done some great work here. He's consolidated a lot of our information. There's information about activities that are going on, how to register for our various forums and experience inventories, and also just general information about 3D hydrography. And then a new task, or it's really not a new task, it's one that's been formalized this project year, is to provide the USGS 3DHP program feedback. We did this in our first year when we reviewed the call for action and provided USGS response to that. So the idea here is that as they develop documents, strategies, or resources, NSGIC would be a body that would be available to respond and provide them feedback. So that's our other task. So that's where we are right now. I am happy to introduce Eric Jespersen and Ellen Fehrs with the state of Pennsylvania. I think you've known both of them for quite a while, and they're going to talk about the realities of all of this. With it takes longer than you think, hydro coordination in Pennsylvania. Eric, I am going to stop sharing and let you start your slides. And please introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background.
Nope. Am I properly sharing now?
You are proper.
Okay. Well, hello, good afternoon. I'm Eric Jespersen. I'm a forester and a science teacher by training, and by employment, more of a natural resource manager and land surveyor and GIS advocate. I wanted to call this too dumb to know when, too dumb to quit. But this is what it takes longer than you think. My co-presenter is new to the game. She's too smart to quit, and she's Ellen Fehrs. Ellen, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Ellen. I work for the Pennsylvania Bureau of Geological Survey, and in a little bit, I'm going to be talking about our efforts to produce a statewide hydrography data set and how that kind of ties into the NHD, the bigger picture.
Okay, yeah, and my talk's probably not a traditional 3DHP talk. It's more like policy, or how long this stuff, what we've been trying, and what that's getting us. So some lessons learned. There's Pennsylvania. Got three really big river what we consider big river basins. Maybe not for the western states, but in the west, the Ohio Basin sends water all the way down to the Gulf. About half our land area is covered by the central half is Susquehanna River Basin, sends water down to the Chesapeake Bay. And then we share the border. Our eastern border is the Delaware River, and we share that basin with also 4 or 5 states. That provides, it's undammed, provides fresh water to New York City from the north and Philly in the south. And both the Delaware and the Susquehanna basins are also managed to some degree by interstate federal compacts that involve state and federal. Susquehanna River Basin Commission and the Delaware River Basin Commission. Slightly different missions, but they have kind of independent management. Then the other image that's in here is census urbanized areas, so you can see where development has occurred in Pennsylvania. A lot of the northern tier there is pretty wild. We're putting some pretty nice water down these rivers. I like looking back to look ahead. This shows 100, a century of management, water management perspective. The under the line in this case are kind of federal or national. right? It's only the 60s and 70s that we even really recognized how badly we were treating the water resources and started doing something about it, both at a state and a federal level. I only called one thing out, that 1913 State Inventory Act. I thought you'd get a kick out of this. The charge was to make a complete inventory of the water resources, and the budget was $150,000 in 1913, and they ended up taking back $100,000 and only allocated $50,000. So stuff doesn't change, right? The politics don't change too much. How about a perspective on the last 50 years worth of water data, right? That we have off-planet sensors that really, started to inform us differently. If you look, the NHD was, 15 years, right? Not really very long. There's a lot of things I'm talking about that'll be 5 and 10 and 15 years. 40 years since the EPA even had the nice reach code mapping. It's really just not that long. This slide's same kind of timeline, but this is more of our modernized data development. PA map program was dreamed up in 2001. It was just going to be high quality, 1 foot color imagery. It would have been the first ever in the state, and we were getting our elevation from that. By 2005, we were able to make a decision to substitute LiDAR instead of vertical points from controlled aerial photography. By 2008, we had that. 2009, we started talking about local resolution, NHD, and then the budgets just went south, and we didn't have any more discussions for a few years. But we had recognized with the LiDAR that, the weakness of the weaknesses of the NHD data. So by 2013, this PA Magic's Mapping and Geographic Information Consortium. That's where I was on the board. This is a volunteer initiative. We just started having a meeting every year to keep pressing to modernize the hydrography data in Pennsylvania. We just every year we started with about 20 or 30 interested people, and now we still get 100. We reach out when we were still having live meetings. We ended up going to, we started all in Harrisburg, but then we ended up with a Delaware Basin meeting and a Ohio Basin meeting, just recognizing how different the situations and the politics and the finance opportunities are in each basin. A direct result of the hydrography data, the water data initiative, that's what we ended up calling them, we still do in some cases, was the creation of a LiDAR working group. In one of the annual meetings, everyone said, we don't want to use this QL3 data, it's getting old. We need new QL2 data. I got some more slides on that. And then I get Ellen might talk a little bit more about it, but there's not a lot of money in this, right? It's all been voluntary, some program. And so the Geologic Survey, where Ellen works, state geologist, a woman named Gail Blackmer, and she said she committed to hydro modernization as part of her mission. But at the time we said we couldn't steward NHD and create something new. And so we had to kind of reaffirm our partnership with USGS that took place in 2019, and we really have gone great guns. That Geologic Survey and USGS partnership is way more than 100 years old as far as our mapping. So just reaffirming and modernizing that relationship too. And I'll talk a little bit more about a EDH pilot that we have, 3,400 square miles, nice pilot project. So I decided to spend my time on lessons learned rather than these aren't how we're deriving anything. So I got a few of those and a couple slides for each one. It takes really a long time to unseat old paradigms. One that's still, I guess it's out of my craw now, but what we call NHD high resolution really isn't. And what we thought was highest resolution at the time, 1 to 24,000. It takes a while. We've gone through LA Hydro, 3D Hydro program, EDH, a lot of different iterations, and I think maybe that's hurt us. I like this 3DHP that we're in now. I think that's helping, and this forum is really kind of keeping our focus on a national level. That's good. We had our DEP, our environmental protection, was the NHD steward. They have no staff. We don't do anything with the NHD right now. So it was kind of a poor choice. These things just happen. Ellen has some cool images that show the difficulty of using state, county, or quadrangles as mapping units. I'm just reprising that same image from the first slide. Our watershed boundaries aren't constrained by our political boundaries. This is one I'd like to combat. I still got a little time left. Too dumb to quit again. But in the 70s, we identified point source pollution that were affecting the water quality. And we were able to stop them, different rules for point and non-point source. But I contend, and I've been saying for the last few years, and I still think that I'm right. I usually think I'm right, even though I'm not. We have good enough data now to identify the source of pollution. There should be nothing that's non-point source. I can tell it's this little farm valley. You can put in immediate sensors and alarms. We can tell where nitrogen and sediments are coming from if we treat them as point sources. There is no such thing as a non-point source anymore. I just put for each a second slide of each one of these lessons learned. I put something to cue me. That's what these images are. We created in our little pots of money, little program offices that still exist. Daily monitoring of public water supply, right? And they have a certain pot of money. And there's so many people that are involved in managing the water that there's no one big pot of money. We're fighting all the time just to get it to do a little bit at a time. We've been lucky in the Chesapeake Basin. I'll show you that. And we're treating, let's see, it's in there, Act 166 and 167 in 1978. We separated stormwater and floodplain management, just in different departments in the state, and it's still a mistake that lingers, right? Floodwater is just stormwater to the max. And then the urbanized areas, it's hard. The NHD just so far, the data model just is having a tough time to incorporate all that urban hydro, and we have MS4 mapping in every one of those municipalities that's not yet in a form that we can use to inform and improve our general hydrography, the PA hydrography data set. And in all those green counties, I'm sorry for the ugly shade of green, they generated their own hydrography mapping over the last 20 or 30 years. Nobody needs their own data anymore. With one big map, we need one set of hydro that everybody relies on. We had a USGS grant in 2015 and worked with Lancaster County. We used flow accumulation. We thought it was the nuts. We were building right on all those tools. And then we saw the geomorphon work that was being done at the Chesapeake Bay program and the UMBC, University of Maryland Baltimore campus. You guys saw Matt Baker and Dave Saavedra here a couple months ago. We're using that with some flow accumulation later for networking. I'm not sure that this is a critical issue, but every time we make a DEM, we're generalizing data and getting rid of some of the detail that was in the point clouds. We did it because it was hard to manage data of those quantities, you know, and we built tools that use grid, but we might end up using point clouds. And the technology just keeps changing. Here's this is the Chesapeake Bay program. My nightmare the whole time has been that we will still create 2 or 3 or 4 more versions of brand new high elevation derived hydrography that all have different attributes. And this reflects some of that potential. We're addressing it and we're comfortable, but all the striped zones, that's the entire Chesapeake Bay region, and the Chesapeake Bay program is developing hydrography flow lines, you know, new flow lines from QL2 LiDAR. The green watersheds are Huck 12s that our Bureau of Geologic Survey, Ellen's creating. That's the units that we're working from. She may have something more to say about that. The orange shaded counties are financed for nutrient management. Those counties are the ones that are for highest priority for sediment and nitrogen reductions in what we're putting down in the Chesapeake Bay. And so that was funded by NRCS. They created another set of stream data for those counties. And then that big darkest blotch, that's our 3,400 square mile EDH pilot. So rather than despairing, I'm just too dumb to quit, we're using these various techniques. We've changed our program from creating data by Huck 12 to accepting data that meets certain criteria and for which we can derive attributes. And we really are trying to, the technology is changing so fast. Each one of these mathematical techniques has value and we want to compare. We have a lab. You guys got universities that want to try and get some of this data. We have a perfect lab to test 2 or 3 different derivations. And we don't want to stifle innovation, and we can just accept the data rather than and quality check it on the way in. That's the positive way to think about this, and we are. Oh, and it's created a nice amount of technical exchange among the practitioners, and now among just since in the last few months at the management level for these different programs. You know, hydro just reveals and depends on all the other data sets. It's pretty clear. I think I'll use the graphics on the next slide more than this slide. But I would say that the contractor on the EDH pilot in the Juniata Basin, we call it a Raystown, if you want to refer to it when you connect with Ellen later to share data. They said, we want local roads. That's been more useful to us than any local hydrography data set that you might have from a county that developed their own over the years. That seems important. We haven't gotten there quite yet, but we're talking. Our DOT, the lower right graphic represents the fact that our DOT maintains great information about the culverts that cross their roads. Same reason that NV5 wanted the local road data, the culvert information. Where's this stuff flowing? So the roads inform the hydro. I put this USGS graphic, the one on the right. It's just so obvious, you know, that one data set informs all the others. And then we're not a public land survey system state, right? Our boundaries were created before everyone made township and range decisions. These blue lines represent streams that are civic boundaries. They're either a town or a county line. You can see our whole eastern boundary is the Delaware River. But all these other ones, it's a quarter to a third of our boundaries are riparian or civic boundaries. And at the moment, completely different data sets that are all just schematic. If you put the census or the PennDOT versions of our civic boundaries down on a map, they don't flood, they don't go in the stream channels. They're just schematic. Saying local, you know, locally there can be more agility than you can at the federal level, you know. And I think this is I have a few slides to illustrate this, a few graphics to illustrate what I'm talking about. We studied when we were using flow accumulation where we wanted to start the upstream end, where we wanted how much flow accumulation at 6 acres, 10 acres, 15 acres, and depending on the terrain, how much flow we want to accumulate before we said the stream initiate. In this case, the graphic on the upper left shows the NHD, the extent of the NHD are the stream, the blue lines. And then the other graphic shows those green dots are the stream initiation points that we were able to look at in the field. Spring house, wetland, you know, where the streams, where you first saw each bit of a stream, right? You need some local knowledge, and we'll end up at our last iteration, someone will have checked all these streams, maybe some crowdsourced stuff at the end, which is showing the value of some additional local information as compared to what you can afford to do at a national level. Oops, maybe that's all I got for local can be more agile. But I think I addressed that in this with some creative partners. We've had usually about 3 or 4 people that stay in charge, stay as leadership for the water data initiative, but it's been a revolving 3 or 4. I'm the last one that started, and I'm not going to be doing this forever. People change, but when they come and go, short term's okay. You could have one person that comes through like a flash on the way to the top, but they might have that one idea that makes a big difference. And it's okay if everyone has differing motivations. There's no purity in this. We just want to get the work done. And the pace is okay. Maybe that's the other lesson from this stuff. Takes a long time, right? Don't expect things to change fast. Pace is fine. And if you have we've been doing okay with annual communications with the big workshop and checking in locally more often. Been quite a bit of nice benefit from our academic partners. They don't necessarily seem to want to be part of the program, but they innovate in ways that benefit us later. That's where the ideas matter. You know, one of our best and biggest and longest partnerships is with the USGS, and so that 3DHP program allowed us to get the LiDAR data, the QL2 LiDAR data that's allowing us to generate the high quality hydro that we have now. This one could have been a disaster. We had the yellow southeast. There's regional transportation and USGS funds that got the first. All those yellowish colors were 2014 and 15 first QL2 LiDAR. That salmon colored stuff was Chesapeake Bay program funded by the Natural Resource Conservation Service and the Bay program jointly. And they had more money for the next year and said, we're not spending it. You guys aren't interested enough. Well, that got our attention, and we got all those 6 state agencies, the DCNR and Emergency Management and Environmental Protection, to pitch in. Came up with about $2 million of state money, including the River Basin Commission. It was unprecedented that they contributed for data development, and got what was at the time the largest BAA award to date. And that was enough. That about 20 counties, 20,000 square miles, maybe 15 or 20,000 square miles, that convinced the NRCS and FEMA and USGS to go ahead and finance the last third of the state. Right? Success story, just because we were talking and we didn't let it drop. And we listened to what they said. If you're not interested, neither are we. Well, we got interested pretty quick. Pretty similar story with the this Raystown demonstration area. The NRCS had leftover money, and FEMA, they each had a little bit of leftover money from doing that western PA portion. And we knew about it, and it took us 1.5 years of just every 3 months saying, what are we doing with that? Where can we prioritize that? How can we help? We never forgot. And that ended up getting funding enough to do 3 big huckates, 3,400 square miles. That's now a national EDH pilot. I learned through this NSGIC meeting a couple months ago when we had a program with Alaska. They had one slide in here that said, we're doing a pilot in Pennsylvania. Nobody here knew that. So the information exchange and the partnerships made a big difference. We jumped on that. And it turns out they're gonna do a NWI integration pilot. We've had discussions now with our DEP, our own wetland scientists, and Fish and Wildlife Service staff from Massachusetts and Virginia offices. And the only thing we're trying to do now is convince them to do all 3 huckates instead of the 2 that they had budgeted. And now we're starting to build a 3D PA demonstration area around that, including early designs with our DOT and census to use the streamlines that we get from the EDH program, from the EDH pilot, to use as the boundary lines, how we might integrate those and keep those as dynamic as they really are. And then the red square, the red block, is Cambria County, and they've got a PEMA grant, Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, for 3D dispatch. So we're just expanding around a core. And I think a little MS4 integration with some modest size municipalities for urban hydrography probably be simpler to pull off, or a good place to start, as compared to trying to do something in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Although we're still trying to develop a Pittsburgh urban hydro pilot. This is the last of the partner slides. You know, we have benefited over the years from a partnership with Craig Koutros at New Jersey DEP and the New Jersey Water Science Center. Craig presented here a few months ago and has been really just a stalwart in NHD, the benefits of NHD on a statewide basis. And he has local resolution NHD done before even EDH techniques came out. But we're affected by all these, and our water is coming from or going to all those adjoining states. This forum has made us think twice about, made us think again about how important it is to get with our adjoining states. And I think I saw Jeff from the River Basin Commission on here, and he recently asked if he could use our own tools and techniques to generate part of our NHD in the Shenango River Basin. Did I get that right, Jeff? Shenango or Chemung? Shenango, in New York State, because their commission needs to work all the way to their headwaters. They need to understand their entire basin. And I got NSGIC in here, right? We have perspective from 67 counties, and Pennsylvania is that little beautiful dark blotch, the keystone in the east. But we're learning we're learning from NSGIC about all the data sets. I guess that's the message, right? You need some creative partners, and you need to be persistent about that. Now I'm going to turn it over to Ellen. I don't know if I ran along, Linda. Ellen's going to be more traditional. She's technical in nature, and she's actually deriving the data. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it right back to Ellen.
Thank you, Eric. If you have any questions about Eric's portion of the presentation, coordination, creative partners, please add them into the chat. And Ellen, I'll ask if you wouldn't mind giving us just a brief background.
Sure.
Once you set up.
Sure. My name, like I said, is Ellen Fehrs. I'm with the Pennsylvania Bureau of Geological Survey. Just to provide some context, Eric was asked to give a talk on hydrography coordination in Pennsylvania, and I have been working on a statewide data set for Pennsylvania. So he asked me to go a little bit more into detail on the current efforts and issues we have in kind of coordinating this across agencies in Pennsylvania.
Ellen, I'm not sure if you're sharing your screen or not. We're not seeing it.
You're not seeing it? Oh man. Let me try. Are you seeing it now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, awesome. My apologies.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
All right. Yep. So as I said, this is focusing on current efforts and issues that I've come across as a data producer in Pennsylvania. So just to kind of summarize what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to discuss the Pennsylvania Hydrography Dataset, or PAHD. I'm going to talk about my own experiences with getting updates into the NHD and talk a little bit about NHD schema. So going into the background of the Pennsylvania Hydrography Dataset, or PAHD, this project was conceived on the idea that we should produce hydrography geometries from quality level 2 or better LiDAR products. Kind of in this vein, these geometries should be accurate to a 1 to 2400 scale. They should include Z values, so this should be 3D data. And as I've been working, my workflow focuses on kind of a HUC 12 by HUC 12 basis. So when Eric showed that production map of all the data sets in our state, all those little orange polygons, those were HUC 12s that I have produced. And what's kind of interesting, when I was first hired, I was under the impression that I would be expected to produce hydrography all by myself for the entire state of Pennsylvania. I very quickly found out that that was not a realistic goal. So as I've been producing this hydrography, I've been trying to kind of evolve my own methodology into a form of data acceptance. So not only am I working on data production, I'm working on data incorporation, so conflation into PAHD. And I did want to show a quick example of PAHD versus the NHD. I don't have the NHD labeled properly. This is the most current iteration. This is the NHD plus high res. On the left, we have my PAHD geometries in orange, and on the right, we have the NHD geometries in pink. And this just kind of exemplifies what I've been trying to do with producing this data. The PAHD, where it has equivalent features in the NHD, because this is produced from elevation data, it just inherently does a better job of conforming to the flow features that we see in the underlying hillshade. It also does a better job picking out some of these smaller tributary features that aren't present in the NHD. And what I kind of want to emphasize is that PAHD, this project was conceived, as Eric said, to be a more agile system of updates. We wanted to give state level data producers like myself more immediate control to see changes put into an existing hydrography data set. And what I want to emphasize is that this is not standalone from the NHD. The ultimate goal is to get these geometries submitted into the most current iteration of the NHD. This is kind of, in some ways, this is a stepping stone along the way. So when it comes to updating the NHD, I have experienced a few stumbling blocks. I do briefly want to mention NHD stewardship. Eric talked about this a little bit, but when I was hired by the Pennsylvania Bureau of Geological Survey, the way this was explained to me was that the Bureau had enough money to hire someone to either create a new hydrography data set or steward the existing data. And I believe, as far as the Bureau knew at the time, I don't know that the USGS had announced plans to continue to produce elevation-derived hydrography. So before I was hired, my job description was written so that I would be focusing on a statewide data set. So I am not the NHD steward for Pennsylvania. A lot of people think I am because I work pretty closely with the NHD, but I am not the current steward for Pennsylvania. So with that in mind, there are currently a few mechanisms that I know of to get updates into the NHD. And the first is the NHD markup application, which is an online tool. I like the idea of this tool a lot. I think it's really user-friendly, and I have used it to submit at least one correction into the NHD. The problem is I actually submitted my correction over a year ago, and quarterly I get these little updates that tell me whether my correction has been reviewed or has been accepted or if it's been discarded. And my correction hasn't been reviewed, essentially. And that's because the person in charge of, I guess, reviewing these corrections submitted through this markup application are supposed to be the NHD steward. And as far as we know, we don't currently have a Pennsylvania steward. So these corrections are kind of just sitting unused at the moment. Now, that's one way to get updates into the NHD. The other way is to become an NHD editor. Now, becoming an NHD editor requires NHD update tool training. This is training that I have taken 2 times so far. The most recent time I took it was in 2021. So all this information is current as of 2021. But this training is offered every other month. They're pretty small classes and they're really detailed and really well conducted. One of the issues is that this kind of training requires a charting and mapping license, which is a paid license. Now, the USGS does have the option of lending out licenses if you agree to produce NHD data. This isn't something I've pursued. I haven't checked out one of these licenses from the USGS, primarily because the NHD update tool itself requires system administrative rights. And this, for me, as a state worker, is kind of an issue. And I don't know, this might be entirely specific to Pennsylvania, but at the state level, ever since the 2020 quarantine, when we got our work from home orders, we experienced a huge increase in the number of cyber attacks on our system. So our Office of Administrations really tightened down on what software we are and are not allowed to install on our machines. So essentially, if we are to install a software that requires administrative approval, we have to enter into a legal agreement with that software vendor saying that they accept all liability for any weaknesses introduced into our system by that software. And even if I thought that was something, I'm not saying that I think that's a reasonable ask, but even if I thought it was a reasonable ask, I don't. This kind of legal agreement, when I've seen coworkers pursue this for software, it can take an incredibly long time for our legal department to be satisfied with the paperwork. And even then, you have to wait some time on approval from the governor's office. So long story short, I didn't think this was a really realistic avenue for me. So this isn't something I've pursued. So I haven't had personally a lot of luck in getting updates into the NHD. Another thing that kind of is a little bit of a stumbling block for me when it comes to updating the NHD is the current NHD schema. So the current NHD schema, I have a poster here showing the schema of the NHD plus high-res data set. And this may be where I lose some of you, but I personally think the current NHD is too complicated. I do have some disclaimers when it comes to this. The following slides, when I discuss this, I do focus on flow lines or equivalent feature classes. I'm not really, at this moment, I'm not going to talk about water bodies or areas or points or anything like that. Also, when I say the current NHD is too complicated, I specifically mean within the context of Pennsylvania. I mean, some of this complexity may be a lot more appropriate for other states. I also want to put the disclaimer on that this is my opinion as a single data producer. This is not the opinion of the Bureau of Geological Survey. This is just kind of what I think as I've interacted with this data. So I have up here on the slide the attribution of, on the far left, the NHD plus high-res data set. Well, the flow line feature class anyway. In the middle, I have the attribution for the EDH data. And on the far right, I have the attribution for PAHD. And if you look at the summation of the fields at the bottom of each of these tables, PAHD actually has the highest number of attribute fields. This isn't quite the complexity I'm talking about when it comes to the NHD. And where I think some of this complexity really comes into play is a field that's present in each of these data sets, the F code field, or the feature code or F code field. And in my experience, this is one of the most important attribute fields in this data. So this is from the NHD plus high-res poster showing a breakdown of all the different F codes. And this does look incredibly complicated, again, because this is showing not only the NHD flow line F codes, it is also showing the NHD area, line, point, water body. So this isn't necessarily a fair comparison, but in total for the flow lines feature class, there are 37 possible F codes. Now, looking at EDH, this slide shows the F codes from the most recently published specs. It also includes some EDH F codes that have been developed kind of subsequent to that publication. And this includes a total of 22 F codes. And I think this is a massive step in the right direction. I really like the organization of EDH, and I'm not going to talk about how many F codes PAHD has just yet. I'm going to get to that. First, I want to talk about how some of these F codes present in Pennsylvania. So as I said, there are 37 possible flowline F codes in the NHD plus HR schema. And in this image on the left, it's shown in pink are all the flow lines, the NHD plus flow lines that overlap the state of Pennsylvania. Now, I wanted to better understand how some of these F codes are used in Pennsylvania. So I made a pie chart kind of showing the occurrence of the different F codes throughout the state. And you can see by a landslide, there are 3 F codes that are used most prominently. And these include artificial paths, intermittent streams and rivers, and perennial streams and rivers. So knowing that these were the most prominently represented F codes in the state, I decided to map the flowline features that have the perennial stream or river F code. I also decided to map all the flow lines that have intermittent stream or river F codes. And as you can see from these images, it has a really blocky appearance, and it's pretty unlikely that this is a true depiction of what's happening on the ground. And I think what was happening here is that these F codes were assigned by a number of people, and they were working in a quad by quad basis. And you can see in some areas, it looks like they didn't bother to differentiate between perennial and intermittent features. They kind of just de facto labeled everything perennial. And I think this kind of error could be really circumvented if the F codes as they existed now were streamlined, if there wasn't so much decision fatigue. And I think this is another reason why it would be really nice if markups to the NHD, if that process could be streamlined as well, or at least made more accessible to people. Now, again, I'm repeating myself, but in the NHD plus HR model, there are 37 possible F codes for flow lines. And in Pennsylvania, of these 37 possible F codes, only 17 F codes are actually in use. So that means the majority of these F codes are not even being used in my state. And this is kind of, I think, more evidence that this schema is a little bit overly complex. Again, I'm going to remind you of that disclaimer. I don't know how these F codes present in other states, but in Pennsylvania, I don't think there's a need for 37 F codes. So in my work, these are the F codes that are used for PAHD geometries. This is a total of 20 F codes, and it's kind of an amalgamation of the F codes that are described in the EDH specs and what currently exists in the NHD plus high res. I do want to draw your attention to the F code at the very bottom. I have a null value, and I created this F code to describe features that do not have an equivalent feature in the NHD. And this brings me to kind of another thing that I've had to deal with, which is determining feature equivalency. Specifically, when we're producing new data, how do we carry over things like permanent identifiers? And I have an example here I wanted to show. Again, the NHD is shown in pink. It is overlying the PAHD shown in orange. And this feature here, it looks like the NHD originally had these two flow line segments. I don't know if you would technically call that an island, but in the most current version of PAHD, we have one flow path segment where there were formerly two flow line segments. And in the NHD, these two segments have two different permanent identifiers. They have two different reach codes, but they are functionally the same. They have the same F type. They have the same F code. So looking at this, I'm not really sure which of these values I would want to pull over from the NHD into PAHD. And that is another reason I really like EDH, and I really like the documentation that's been published with EDH. There's a huge emphasis on conflation. And in the EDH acquisition specification, the word conflation was used 70 times. So the USGS is very much aware that conflation is kind of the next step in this workflow. They know that we need kind of a finish line to shoot for. So looking forward towards 3DHP, some things that I'm asking for as a data producer are that data submissions become more accessible, that the data schema, however it ends up presenting, it should be more streamlined than it is currently. And I hope that the USGS really embraces the work they've done with EDH. And also, I asked for conflation guidelines. What is this final product going to look like that we're shooting for? And this is my final disclaimer. This is all very, very easy for me to say. I am not the one who has to accept a plethora of data from a number of different states. I'm not the one that has to update all the USGS conflation tools. So, I mean, these are kind of sky high asks, and I'm aware of that. But these are the things that I'm asking for to be a better data producer and to work better with the USGS. And that's all I have. And I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to hand it back over to Eric.
I am going to share one more slide. Two more, I think. You know, the lessons that we're trying to share are that we can be a little more agile locally. We shouldn't be lording that over the GS. You know, we can help them. I think that's the good lesson. The technologies are changing. This doesn't come from the National Geospatial programs, but it's USGS water mission area, right? This has all the lessons in one place, right? Technology is dynamic. You need creative partners. You need partnerships. And the old paradigms take a long time to go away, but they do. And I didn't have any disclaimers in my my presentation, but I think all the ones Ellen used apply, right? We like working with the GS, with NSGIC. We think we can learn from and have something to share with all our other partners, and appreciate your time and patience in our presentations. Contact us if you want something technical. Go right to Ellen. And nobody asked for this advice, but it's paid us to be persistent, to be factual and flexible, and have some fun. I think that's all we got.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Please, if you have questions, you can enter them into the chat now. Switching slides here. All right, Phil, would you like to, I'll get it started, but please feel free to jump in. Drew Lane, in terms of completing perm ID, the feature that is the longest. Actually, I'm gonna ask you, Drew, to come off and just, you feel free to come off mute and ask your own question or make your own comment.
Right, yeah, so in this situation, there are multiple features in the existing data, and you have a single feature in the new data. It's the largest feature in the original that would get conflated to the new feature. If that makes sense. If that doesn't make sense, reach out to us at nhd@usgs.gov, and we'll set up a short call with you to go over that.
And then Drew, did you also want to comment on the change of the requirement?
Oh, right. Yeah. Yes. Thanks for bringing that up. That's something we've actually been very actively working on, like within the last month. So we just pushed out a new version of the NHD update. It's available today. And that change that's removing the mapping and charting extension will be in the next version that gets publicly released. So it is very actively in work, and will be done pretty soon.
That is really good to hear. I mean, I gotta be honest, I'd be so interested in taking the NHD update tool training a third time, because I get so much out of it every time.
Good.
I don't know if the USGS expects data producers to take it multiple times, but I feel like I come away better for it each time I take it.
Yeah, so you're not alone in that. It's a lot of material, right? So as you mentioned in your presentation, the NHD is incredibly complicated. And so every time you turn a page, you learn new information. Or every time you look at data from a different perspective, you have a new question. So that training is a great way to learn more things. We've considered actually kind of offering like a 201 or 301 level training. It's just there, as a result, there's a lot of material, too much material to cover just in that update class. But it would be more specific to the data. So,
well, thank you.
Yeah.
I am going to interrupt. It is 4 o'clock. So for those of you that are just here for the presentation, our feelings will not be hurt if you leave. However, we will go ahead and proceed with the Q&A a little bit here. Josh Greenberg, would you like to come off and add your comment?
Oh, sure. I was just commenting. I agree with Ellen. There was an awful lot provided in the training, but I just want to make sure people are aware that the TEM meetings, which are a little harder to find now, I think, because they've switched to a SharePoint system, so you don't get emails reminders yet. But these are monthly meetings, and Ryan often will give little tips and tricks that he's been working on, and it can be really helpful just to give you short little, instead of taking the entire training, it is a great way to kind of keep updated.
Great. If anybody from USGS could put any information, a link or anything about how to access those sessions into the chat, that would be appreciated. If you don't have it right on the tip of your tongue, understand. Rick, go ahead and come off mute and please share your questions. Thank you, Quentin.
Yeah, I just had a question. I'm from Minnesota, and we're trying to look at creating new line work for Minnesota based on LiDAR data and DEMs. But I was wondering, Ellen, as you create that new line work, are you submitting that new line work alignment to the USGS, to that markup application?
I have not. I submitted one update, and I was kind of waiting to hear back to see if it was reviewed. To be honest, now that I'm thinking of it, Drew said something that kind of jogged my memory. I submitted the update long enough ago that the markup tool used to let you make changes to the NHD and the NHD plus high res. So I don't super know how it works on the back end. It may very well have gotten lost in the transition to now you just make updates, I believe, to the NHD. That was way too long. To answer your question, no, I have not been submitting my line work as I've been producing it. But from what I understand, looking at the tool, it doesn't look like it would be very hard to do. They do have ways that you can upload line work and incorporate it using their interface. So that is something I should look into doing.
Thanks for that answer. Yeah, we haven't quite figured out that process yet in Minnesota here. There's multiple data stewards, but we're trying to get new line work. So thank you.
Well, if I figure it out, I will drop you a line.
That might be another session, another forum. So, well, let's go ahead. I don't see any new questions. Thank you, Josh, for the link to the HDC. Let's go ahead and proceed with our interview questions. And I'm not sure. I guess I'll throw them to Eric and to Ellen for them to discuss, or maybe they want to do it one at a time, whichever. But and when I say you're starting over, I realize that's a long time for Pennsylvania. What would you do differently? I know, Eric, you touched on some of the lessons learned, but is there anything in specific that you would do differently, or Ellen, in your process of actually dealing with the data, anything that you would do differently now?
You know, we talked about the questions, Ellen and I, offline before
They're
the
not
session.
supposed to know that you know them.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Can't help just saying what I think.
I know.
It's a peek behind the curtain.
Yeah, you know, I think that whatever we did, we learned. I wouldn't change a thing, right? it's not really a fair question. We didn't, neither one of us thought we would do much differently because we've learned through the process. And that's how we both thought about the question.
Okay, so it was a learning experience as you went along.
Yeah.
Okay. What during this process surprised you?
I could answer that. I was surprised in trying to learn more about the NHD and how my state plays a part, just the diversity in approaches and methods that are used at the USGS level, which I just think that's really interesting that so many people have so many different backgrounds when it comes to producing and organizing this data.
And I would say the patience and resilience of our USGS partners, right? I saw a lot of their names in the participant list. Steve Achel, Becky Anderson, Sylvia, Eliza Gross, right? They're really patient with us and with us saying things that are from our perspective that just don't even pertain to someone who has to standardize data from 50 people, 50 states like us into one coherent mass. So the patience and the scale of what they're trying to do and the pace.
I know those comments are appreciated because I know one of the benefits of this project is USGS getting more insight into the state perspective. And sometimes that comes out as challenges or frustrations. But as we can see just in the comments made today, they're highly responsive to this input. So we appreciate this partnership. So what resources, other than the data itself, did you find most valuable in the process? I know, Ellen, you mentioned the training being of value.
Yeah, and this might be such a cop-out, but the NSGIC meetings, like all the meetings.
Go ahead, girl, just go ahead.
Yeah, they've been incredibly helpful. Sometimes if I'm stuck, I might scroll through the old webinars and see what topics were hit up. And I found it incredibly useful to hear the perspectives of each of the different states. So I really like these meetings.
Fantastic.
And I like the people, right? That's where I've been focusing. We get 100 people a year in the annual meetings that have ideas and interests. And it's the vendors, it's the feds, it's the other states, right? It's the variety. I think that's what keeps me interested.
I appreciate, there are a lot of perspectives involved here. And the more that we can talk and share information, I think it helps one another appreciate, to have a bigger understanding, right? A broader understanding. Yes, and utilize those online communities. Continue those dialogues, Dan says in the chat. So I guess I would ask so that was what you found the most valuable. What do you recommend for development to assist in the derivation of Hydro? What new resources, again, documents, tools, dialogues, do you recommend to assist in the derivation of Hydro?
I mean, a lot of my workflow is based on the work done by Matthew Baker and David Saavedra for the Chesapeake Conservancy. I think they've done fantastic work with geomorphons. So I would highly recommend everybody check out their NSGIC presentation and read the paper they published in 2018. In terms of learning how to produce hydro, I've also found it really useful to reach out and talk to, as Eric said, there are a lot of counties in Pennsylvania that are county offices that are producing their own hydrography. And it's been really helpful to talk to them because I have found that it's nearly impossible to have a single coherent workflow that produces accurate hydrography for every different land type. So these county folks, they really know their region really well, and they really know what an accurate reflection of that hydrography looks like. So that's what I would recommend.
Very good.
Patience is a good resource. This is iterative, and it builds on that the EPA hydro from 40 or 50 years ago. It's just iterative, and we just keep getting one more layer at a time of improvement, one more level of improvement. And we're gonna keep iterating, and maybe a simpler data model won't hurt.
Any last questions for Eric or Ellen?
Yeah, this is Phil. I have one. Well, I have 100, but I'll start with one. Eric, you mentioned that the DEM didn't have enough resolution, and that you were thinking or pondering, or I don't know if you've actually tried using the point cloud. I'm just interested in your expanding on that thought a little bit, because I think that's an interesting observation.
It's not my original thought. We got one of the leaders in the water data initiatives, a guy named Matt Mercurio. He was a county GIS manager, and now he's in private practice. And he says for the urban detail, he wants every bit of detail, and he wants to use TINs rather than DEM and the tools that we're already using. You can see the curbs, you can see some of the surface flow, just that extra detail that's available. We think that's going to be a key for, he thinks, I would say, and the examples he's shown make a good point. But the tools aren't built. The tools are built to use DEMs.
Right.
Point clouds show a lot of detail, and every time you alter the DEM, it becomes subjective in some way rather than an objective original point cloud.
Yeah, I just dropped Matt's contact info in the chat. He's been doing a lot of work with urban hydrography. So he's interested in accuracy on the scale of like tens of centimeters, where I am perfectly satisfied with an order of meters. So if you're interested in learning more about his approach, I would reach out to him.
Great, thanks. Also follow up on you guys started your original work with your mapping in Pennsylvania, looking at flow accumulation. And then it sounds like you kind of moved into more of a geomorphon methodology, but then you also talked about crowdsourcing with local point source information for headwaters. Where are you kind of landing with that going forward?
Well, from my perspective, I'm focused primarily on geomorphons right now, just picking out those actual channel structures. Ultimately, I think crowdsourcing those headwaters or initiation points it's a great way to go, because it's so tricky trying to figure out where you want to end the upper extent of your line. Having said that, I haven't done very much crowdsourcing yet. I've done a little bit of field verification on my own. I've even gone into the field with Eric, but we haven't set up a crowdsourcing application yet.
We're starting
AI versus crowd.
I think we're probably open. That's all coming. It's all coming. Another 25 years, who knows what it's going to look like. we're working with a concept now called, base map 2030. And that's even too far to look ahead.
Mhm. And
And something that we're just saying, it's 3D PA, where we might not have 8 data sets anymore. We might just have a 3D model that has roads and hydro, has break lines on top of the main point cloud, and everything else just lays on top of that. I'm pretty open to a lot of different data models. And
yeah, and actually, I
go
do
ahead.
want to toss it out there. I'm also interested in looking. I'm seeing more and more in the literature about machine learning and deep learning, and I think that has the potential to be like a great application to this workflow. I haven't seen. I don't know. I'm just putting that out there. That's yet another thing we want to consider.
And we have been, we had some interesting tickles from Penn State and their high performance computing center, right? When we get the routines that we like,
Mhm.
a little bit longer time in practice, and maybe looking at the 3 varieties of flow lines from different techniques in that Chesapeake Bay region. That'll be enough information to do some larger analytics. I think it's not, this stuff takes a long time, but still seems to happen fast in the human mind.
So you primarily talked about flow line updates. Are you also updating your watershed boundaries at your HUC 12 level?
That's not something I've looked at yet. I've been focusing on equivalent feature classes for the NHD flow lines, water bodies, and areas. So that's kind of where I'm focusing my efforts.
Well, thank you all. Karen Rogers, are you still on the line?
Yes, I am.
Would you mind asking the community if they would be interested in helping with the COGO assessment, giving them a little background?
I would love to. Thank you, Linda. Yeah, so hopefully most of you are familiar with the COGO, before known as the COGO report card, where they went through an exhaustive process to assign grades to the framework layers as maintained by covered agencies. And this year they have rebranded it. Well, it's actually going to be produced next year, but it's now the COGO NSDI assessment. And NSGIC is either helping or taking the lead on 4 themes, one of them being hydrography. And Josh Greenberg with Washington has offered to help out. He's already thrown up his hand to, I don't know if he's going to lead the hydrography team, hopefully, but he definitely needs help. He can't do it himself. And so given the people that are on this call, I thought it would be a good opportunity to cast a net and see if anyone else is willing to help Josh with that. The idea is to start with the geospatial maturity assessment questions. And so you're not starting from scratch. The idea is to tweak those questions basically the idea is to throw the survey out to all of the members of COGO organizations. So it's going to be a lot of people hitting this survey, but yeah, we need people who are fairly well versed in hydrography and who are willing to spend probably 1 or 2 hours a month at first, and then there'll be a lull while the survey is out, and then a few hours a month to dig into the results and draft up that chapter of the report. So if anyone is interested and willing, please reach out to me if you want to learn more, and I'd be happy to visit with you more, or if you want to if you want to help out, then that's great too. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, if you have interest, you can email me or Phil, and we're happy to get you in touch with both Karen and Josh. So please do pursue that. So as you all are aware, the forum is the 3rd Wednesday of every month, 3 to 4:30 p.m. Our next forum is going to be Wednesday, May 18th, and the USGS is going to be talking to us. Thank you, Josh. He's put his email into the chat. Thank you. The USGS is, we've been hearing a lot about these pilot projects, and they've offered to give us a presentation on an overview of their 3DHP pilot work. Like, why are they doing these pilots, and what's the specific objectives, or the objectives in general, as well as the specific objectives of each pilot. So it's not necessarily the outcomes and the findings, more about the work that's being done and why it's being done. So I hope you're able to join us next Wednesday. As always, I encourage you to put a placeholder in your calendar. As you know, registration opens at the beginning of each month. We have to do that for security purposes. So unless there are any more questions or comments, last call. We truly appreciate you all joining us. We know it's late in the day for some of those East Coasters, but this is always gets us invigorated. And then Phil and I have a conversation well into the afterwards, just trying to follow up on everything. So again, thank you for your time. We appreciate you joining us. Hope to see you next month. And please reach out to either one of us if you need additional information or assistance. So thank you, and have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and special thank you to our speakers today.